When a homeless man approached Barron Trump asking for just a single dollar, no one could have predicted what would happen next. What began as a simple act of kindness would soon ignite a nationwide movement, reunite a shattered family, and change lives forever. The city's pulse was relentless. Car horns blared, pedestrians wove through the streets, and a constant murmur of voices filled the air. At the corner of Broad Street and 17th Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, a man sat hunched against the weathered brick wall of an old convenience store. His clothes were tattered, layers barely enough to shield him from the piercing winter chill. Beside him, a worn cardboard sign read, "Anything helps. God bless." His name was Leonard, though few cared to ask. At 42, he had been living on the streets for nearly a year, a series of misfortunes stripping him of everything he had once held dear. Every day was a gamble. Some passers-by might toss him a few coins, but most simply hurried past, avoiding his gaze. Leonard adjusted his beanie, suppressing a shiver. He watched as all kinds of shoes passed him. High heels, sneakers, polished loafers. Then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed something different. A pair of pristine white sneakers had stopped just a few feet away from him. They weren't just expensive. They were the kind only someone truly privileged and young would wear. His curiosity stirred. Leonard looked up. Standing there was a teenager, tall and remarkably composed, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of a sleek jacket. Leonard squinted against the sunlight, a flicker of recognition sparking in his mind. He knew that face, but he couldn't immediately place it. The boy stood at the corner, scrolling through his phone, unaware of the attention he was attracting. People whispered, some discreetly pulling out their phones to snap pictures. Leonard hesitated. He usually didn't approach anyone unless they made eye contact first, but there was something different about this boy. He wasn't in a rush like everyone else. There was a quiet observance about him, a calmness that felt strangely out of place amidst the city's chaos. Taking a breath, Leonard spoke up, his voice raspy from the cold. "Hey, young man," he called, forcing a smile. "Can you spare $1?" The boy froze mid-scroll, his head tilting slightly, as if to confirm he had heard correctly. Slowly he turned to face Leonard, his expression unreadable. For a moment, everything seemed to slow. Leonard braced for rejection. He was used to it. But what happened next was anything but ordinary. "What do you need it for?" the boy asked, his voice steady yet firm. The question caught Leonard off guard. It wasn't dismissive or condescending. There was something about the way the boy asked, as if he truly wanted to know. Leonard swallowed hard. He hadn't expected a conversation. "Well," he started, rubbing his hands for warmth, "a cup of coffee would be nice, maybe a sandwich if I'm lucky." His voice faltered. It was unnerving to be questioned, but there was no hostility in the boy's tone, just genuine curiosity. The boy stepped closer, his phone now forgotten in his pocket. Leonard could feel the weight of onlookers' stares, the silent judgment of people wondering why someone like him was speaking with someone like this kid. Leonard resisted the urge to shrink back. He wanted to disappear, to avoid the humiliation, but the boy's gaze kept him anchored. "What's your name?" the boy asked. "Leonard," he murmured. The boy gave a small nod, his brow furrowing as if he were piecing together a puzzle far beyond this moment. "I'm Barron," he said simply. There was no arrogance in his introduction, no air of self-importance, just a quiet sincerity that felt strangely unexpected. The hum of the city resumed, but something in that exchange had shifted. The space between them felt charged, as if this fleeting moment would set something much greater into motion. Leonard shifted uneasily on the cold pavement, uncertain of how to respond. Barron's presence was unlike anything he had encountered before. Most people ignored him, diverted their eyes, or tossed loose change in his direction without acknowledging him. But this young man, he wasn't just stopping, he was talking to him, as if he were an equal. Then, Barron did something unexpected. He crouched down to meet Leonard at eye level. Leonard's breath hitched. No one had ever done that before. "How long have you been out here?" Barron asked, his voice calm but direct. Leonard hesitated. Telling his story wasn't something he often did. People didn't care about the reasons, only the spectacle of his misfortune. But there was something disarming about Barron's presence. "Almost a year now," Leonard admitted. Lost my job when the plant shut down, then my health took a turn. Couldn't keep up with rent." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "It's been downhill ever since." Barron listened intently, his gaze narrowing, not in judgment, but in focus. It was a look Leonard wasn't used to, a mix of curiosity and concern, as if the teenager was trying to piece together a larger picture. The quiet tension among the crowd grew. People were watching, whispering, some stopping in their tracks. They were drawn to the sight. The heir to the Trump name crouched beside a homeless man on the sidewalk. "What about family?" Barron asked. Leonard clenched his jaw. He shook his head. "Not much of that anymore. My folks passed years ago. My brother, well, we haven't talked in ages." He let out a hollow chuckle. "Not much left to lose when you've already lost it all." Barron was silent for a moment, as if weighing Leonard's words carefully. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached into his pocket. Leonard's pulse quickened. He had asked for $1, just one. But Barron's actions hinted at something more. When his hand emerged, it wasn't holding a single bill, but a crisp $100 note. Leonard blinked, stunned. The sight alone made his breath catch. "Here," Barron said, extending the bill toward him. "This should cover more than just coffee." Leonard stared at the money, frozen in place. For a long moment he couldn't react. It wasn't just the amount. It was the gesture that left him speechless. "Are you serious?" he finally croaked, his voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. "Why would you do that?" Barron shrugged lightly. "Because I can." The simplicity of the answer made Leonard speechless. Before he could find the words, Barron leaned in slightly, his voice softer. "But listen," he added, his tone quieter, more deliberate. "This isn't just about the money. I want you to promise me something." Leonard's grip on the bill tightened. "What's that?" Barron's expression shifted, his youthful features suddenly carrying a seriousness beyond his years. "If I help you today, you've got to help yourself tomorrow. Deal?" A lump formed in Leonard's throat. Those words hit harder than he expected. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone wasn't just giving him a lifeline, they were challenging him. He nodded, unable to find the right words. "Good," Barron said, standing back up. His gaze flicked briefly to the crowd, which had grown considerably. Leonard's face burned as he realized people had been watching, recording even. His emotions twisted between gratitude, embarrassment, and something he couldn't quite name. Barron reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out a pen and a small notepad. He scribbled something quickly, then tore off a piece of paper and handed it to Leonard. "Go to this address tomorrow morning," he instructed. "They'll help you out. Tell them Barron sent you." Leonard unfolded the note, his hands shaking slightly. It was an address, a local shelter and resource center. One he had heard of, one he had always been too proud or too ashamed to walk into. "I'll make sure they're expecting you," Barron added, his voice firm, unwavering. The air around them seemed different now. Leonard clutched the paper and the money. This wasn't just kindness. It was hope. A fragile, flickering light in a world that had been dark for far too long, and somehow Leonard knew this was only the beginning. He sat there, staring at the bill and the note in his hands as if they were foreign objects. His mind raced, caught between disbelief and cautious hope. Barron didn't leave right away. He stood there, watching Leonard, his gaze holding an intensity that felt almost unsettling. He wasn't just offering a handout, he was waiting for something. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or a commitment. Leonard cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." Barron tilted his head slightly, a faint smile forming on his lips. "Because everyone has a story, Leonard. Yours just hasn't been told yet." He glanced briefly at the growing crowd. "And honestly, if I'm in a position to do something good, why wouldn't I?" Leonard was taken aback. Over the years he'd heard plenty of empty words, but this felt different. Still, doubt gnawed at him. "You don't owe me anything," Leonard said, his voice firmer now. "I've been out here long enough to know people don't stop to help without expecting something in return." Barron crouched down again, leveling his gaze with Leonard's. "I don't expect anything," he said simply, "but I do believe small actions can lead to something bigger." He gestured toward the note in Leonard's hand. "That place. They've got resources, job programs, counseling, whatever you need. All I'm asking is that you show up." Leonard swallowed hard. He looked down at the note again. The address was scribbled in neat handwriting. He wanted to believe this was real. But disappointment had hardened him over the years. "And what if I can't do it?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "What if I screw it up?" Barron's smile was faint but steady. "Everyone screws up, Leonard. But giving up, that's the only way you lose." His words were simple, but they landed with a force Leonard wasn't prepared for. For a brief moment the city noise seemed to fade, and all he could hear was the quiet conviction in Barron's voice. The crowd around them had thickened. Phones were now openly filming. Someone murmured, "Is that Barron Trump?" Leonard's stomach twisted. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. He had spent years being ignored, but now the weight of so many eyes on him felt suffocating. Barron, however, was unfazed. If anything, he seemed to thrive under the pressure. His calmness contrasted sharply with Leonard's unease. "Ignore them," Barron said softly, as if reading his mind. "This is about you and me right now. No one else matters." A strange sense of relief washed over Leonard. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel invisible. Someone saw him, really saw him, and cared enough to listen. Leonard exhaled slowly. "All right," he said finally, his voice steadier. "I'll go. I'll show up." Barron's expression softened. A genuine smile crossed his face. "That's all I wanted to hear." He stood, brushing the dust off his knees. Then, glancing at the crowd, he added, louder now, as if making sure everyone heard, "And Leonard, you've got more strength in you than you realize. Don't forget that." Leonard blinked. A mix of gratitude and embarrassment swirled inside him. He wanted to say something, anything, but no words came. Instead, he simply nodded, clutching the note in his hand like a lifeline. Barron turned to leave. The crowd parted for him, whispers growing louder as he disappeared into the sea of people. Leonard watched him go, his figure blending into the city. And for the first time in years, Leonard felt something stir within him. "Oh." He glanced at the note again. This was his first step toward reclaiming his life. The next morning, Leonard stood outside the address Barron had given him. A modest brick building sat on a quiet Cleveland street. A simple sign marked the entrance. Hope Outreach Resource Center. A small stream of people filtered in and out, some carrying grocery bags, others looking just as uncertain as Leonard felt. He clutched the note in his pocket, his fingers tracing the edges, as if reminding himself that this was real. That this wasn't just another fleeting moment of luck. It was a chance, and this time he wasn't going to waste it. The crisp $100 bill remained tucked safely inside his jacket. A part of him wanted to keep it there, to hold on to the generosity as tangible proof that the events of yesterday had truly happened. But another part, the one awakened by Barron's words, whispered that this wasn't about the money. It was about a chance to start again. Taking a deep breath, Leonard stepped inside. The warmth of the building wrapped around him, a stark contrast to the bitter cold outside. A middle-aged woman sat behind the reception desk, her kind eyes meeting his with a welcoming smile. "How can I help you today?" Leonard hesitated before pulling the note from his pocket, sliding it across the counter. Barron sent me. He said I should come here." Her gaze flicked to the paper, and a knowing smile spread across her face. "Ah. You must be Leonard. We've been expecting you." She stood, motioning for him to follow. "Come on, let's get you started." The next few hours blurred together. Leonard met with a caseworker who listened without judgment and helped outline a plan to get him back on his feet. They secured him a temporary bed at the shelter, scheduled a doctor's appointment to address his health concerns, and even connected him with a job training program. It was overwhelming, but for the first time in years, Leonard felt like the broken pieces of his life were being carefully gathered, ready to be put back together. That evening, as he sat on the edge of his cot, he replayed everything in his mind: the kindness of a stranger, the offer of help, the simple, profound act of being seen. It still felt unreal. He thought about Barron's words, the promise he had made, not to anyone else, but to himself. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time Leonard believed maybe it was possible. Meanwhile, outside the shelter, Barron's gesture had begun to ripple far beyond what either of them could have imagined. A bystander had captured a video of their interaction, and overnight it had gone viral. The footage spread across social media like wildfire, headlines exploding with praise for the young Trump heir's unexpected act of generosity. The video showed Barron kneeling beside Leonard, offering him money, speaking words of encouragement, and something about the moment struck a chord with millions. Some called it a publicity stunt. Others debated whether it was a rare glimpse of true compassion from someone born into privilege. Regardless of the arguments, one thing was undeniable. The video had captured something raw, something powerful, and people responded. Donations began pouring into Hope Outreach Resource Center. Volunteers stepped forward, eager to help, all inspired by a moment that, for Leonard, had simply been a lifeline. He had no idea his story had become the center of a national conversation. He was too busy moving forward, filling out job applications, attending his first counseling session, learning, lately, to believe in himself again. That night, as he lay down in the shelter, the weight of the past year felt just a little lighter. Somewhere out there, the young man who had stopped for him was making waves. But Leonard's focus was simple: take it one day at a time, honor the promise he made. By the end of the week, Leonard started noticing subtle changes. Not just in himself, but in the world around him. The shelter staff greeted him with warmth, offering not just practical support, but genuine encouragement. His story had quietly spread among the shelter residents. Others who had been struggling in silence began opening up to him. One man clapped him on the back and said, "If you can do it, maybe I can too." The words stirred something deep inside Leonard, something he hadn't felt in a long, long time: pride. Outside the shelter, however, Leonard's story was anything but quiet. The video had exploded across the internet. Millions of views, news outlets dissecting every detail, commentators debating whether Barron's kindness was genuine or performative. Social media erupted. A tweet read, "Privilege with a purpose, this is how you use it for good." Another user posted, "It's sad that kindness like this is so rare that it shocks us. But kudos to Barron for showing us it's possible." Leonard only learned about the attention when a staff member showed him the video. Watching himself on the screen, he felt a rush of emotions: embarrassment, gratitude, and something else he couldn't quite name. The man in the video, he barely recognized him. The hollow eyes, the defeated posture. It was a painful reminder of how far he had fallen, and maybe how far he could rise. Meanwhile, Barron refused to comment on the viral moment. No interviews, no public statements, no engagement with the online frenzy. To him, this wasn't about attention. This was about Leonard. Quietly, behind the scenes, Barron ensured that the shelter received substantial donations, enough to expand their programs and help even more people. And then, something bigger happened. The video sparked a movement. Across the country, people started performing their own small acts of kindness, tagging them with hashtags like Kindness Challenge, Pay It Forward. Nonprofits saw surges in donations. Local shelters reported increases in volunteers, all because one young man had stopped to listen. For Leonard, the ripple effect became personal. One evening, as he sat in the shelter's common room, a man approached him. There was something familiar about him. "Leonard?" the man asked hesitantly. Leonard squinted. Then his breath caught. Paul? His younger brother. The one he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. The two men stared at each other, the weight of lost years hanging heavy in the air. Paul finally broke the silence. "I saw the video," he admitted, sitting beside him. I didn't know things had gotten this bad. I should have reached out sooner." Leonard swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "It's not your fault," he murmured. "I didn't exactly make it easy to find me." Paul placed a hand on his shoulder. "Well, I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." The reunion was bittersweet. A reminder of what had been lost, but also of what could be rebuilt. For Leonard it was another step, not just toward survival, but toward healing. As the weeks passed, he began to see his story differently. Not as a tragedy, but as proof of resilience. He still had a long road ahead, but he carried something now he hadn't felt in years. A quiet, steady force that had begun with a single moment of kindness. Hope.